So, I recently had to deal with a power-hungry HOA president who thought she could control my property, even though I wasn't part of the HOA. At first, it was just passive-aggressive warnings and petty complaints. But when I refused to let her onto my land, she completely lost it. I'm talking full-blown meltdown, screaming, and even trying to shove me out of the way. Yeah, it got bad. But what she didn't expect? I had proof, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. Let me start from the beginning. Moving into my new home was supposed to bring me peace and quiet. After years of renting in crowded apartment buildings, I finally had my own land, a place where I could do what I wanted without nosy landlords or overbearing neighbors. Also, I thought, the house was perfect, spacious, private, and just outside the boundaries of an HOA-controlled neighborhood. That last part was a selling point for me. I'd heard the horror stories about power-hungry HOA boards, and I wanted nothing to do with them. Unfortunately, Karen, the HOA president, had other plans. The first time I met her, I was in my driveway unpacking when I heard a sharp, deliberate cough. I turned around to see a middle-aged woman in business casual attire, arms crossed, with an expression that could curdle milk. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, but there was no warmth in her voice. "I'm Karen, the head of the HOA." I shook her hand, keeping it polite, but before I could even introduce myself, she started talking. "I just wanted to make sure you're familiar with our community rules. We like to keep things orderly around here." I frowned. "Oh, I'm not in the HOA," I said. "This property is outside your jurisdiction." Karen's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "whether or not you're technically part of the HOA, it's important to be a good neighbor. Most people here follow our guidelines to keep the area looking presentable." She pulled out a printed rulebook from her bag and thrust it into my hands. "You'll want to read this," she insisted. I flipped through it and nearly laughed. Lawn height restrictions, pre-approved paint colors, no visible trash cans. This was exactly the kind of nonsense I had moved to escape. "I appreciate it," I said, handing the booklet back. "But again, my property isn't part of the HOA. I'll take care of my home my way." That should have been the end of it. But Karen's forced smile twitched at the corners. "I see," she said, her tone clipped. "Well, we'll see how that goes." And with that, she turned on her heel and stomped back down the street. I didn't think much of it at first, but within days, Karen made it painfully clear that she wasn't going to let me live peacefully. The first issue? My mailbox. I came home one evening to find a bright orange notice taped to it, stating that my mailbox did not conform to HOA aesthetic standards. I ripped it down and tossed it in the trash. Then came the lawn comments. One morning, I caught her standing at the edge of my property, hands on her hips, shaking her head at my grass. "It's looking a little overgrown," she called out. "We like to keep things neat around here." I bit back a sarcastic response and went inside. But the worst came when I decided to install a new fence. The very next day, Karen showed up again, this time with a clipboard. "I don't recall you submitting a request for this," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. I sighed. "That's because I don't have to. I'm not in the HOA," she frowned. "Well, regardless, it's customary to keep things uniform. You wouldn't want to stick out in the neighborhood, would you?" I finally lost my patience. "Karen," I said firmly, "I bought this house specifically because it's not in your HOA. I don't need your approval for anything." For a split second, her mask of fake friendliness slipped, revealing pure annoyance. Then, just as quickly, she forced a tight-lipped smile. "Of course," she said. "I just hope you'll be considerate." And with that, she turned and walked away. But something told me this wasn't over, and I was right. I thought ignoring Karen would make her lose interest and move on. I was wrong. Instead of backing off, she doubled down, turning what should have been a peaceful life into a constant battle. It started small, annoying, but nothing I couldn't handle. First, the warning letters. Even though I wasn't part of the HOA, Karen kept leaving printed violations in my mailbox. Your trash bins were visible from the street. Your fence is not HOA compliant. Your lawn does not meet community standards. Every time I saw one of those letters, I tossed it straight into the garbage. But the real problem started when she got the neighbors involved. Karen went door to door telling people that I was a troublemaker who refused to follow community rules. Suddenly, my friendly new neighbors stopped waving back. Some of them even gave me dirty looks when I walked outside. One guy across the street, who had been friendly the first week, now refused to make eye contact. It was obvious that Karen had poisoned the well. Then came the petty revenge. A week after our last conversation, I woke up to find my sprinkler system mysteriously damaged. Someone had stomped on one of the heads, flooding part of my lawn. A few days later, my trash cans were knocked over in the middle of the night. At first, I thought it was just bad luck, maybe some raccoons or a storm, but then I checked my security camera footage. There she was. Karen, at 2 a.m. walking past my driveway, accidentally bumping my trash bins over with a little extra force. I watched in disbelief as she glanced around, made sure no one saw her, and strutted away like she had just won a battle. That's when I knew this wasn't just about rules, it was personal. I finally confronted her after she filed a noise complaint against me for mowing my lawn. The city sent me a notice stating that my lawn equipment was disrupting the neighborhood's tranquility. That was the last straw. I stormed over to her house and knocked. She answered with her usual fake smile, arms crossed like she had been expecting me. "Is there a problem?" she asked sweetly. "You know there is," I snapped. "I got a complaint about my lawnmower in the middle of the day." She shrugged. "Well, you were making quite a bit of noise. This is a peaceful neighborhood." I laughed in disbelief. "Are you serious? You're just making up excuses at this point." Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Look," she sighed, "if you just agreed to follow our community guidelines, I wouldn't have to escalate things." And there it was, the thinly veiled threat. She was punishing me because I wouldn't bow to her HOA nonsense. I clenched my jaw, keeping my temper in check. "Karen," I said slowly, "I'm not in your HOA. You have zero authority over me." Her eye twitched. "Well," she said coldly, "we'll see about that." And with that, she slammed the door in my face. I walked away, shaking my head, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't just annoying, she was obsessed, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go. I knew Karen was relentless, but I didn't expect her to completely lose it. After weeks of petty harassment, bogus complaints, and late-night sabotage, I thought she had hit her limit. But Karen? She had one more move to play, and it was her biggest mistake yet. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was in my backyard, finally relaxing, when I heard angry voices at the front gate. I walked around to see Karen standing there with two other HOA board members, all holding clipboards. Her arms were crossed, and she had a self-satisfied smirk like she had just won something. "Good afternoon," she called out, her tone fake cheerful. I frowned. "What do you want, Karen?" She held up her clipboard. "We're here to conduct an inspection of your property." I blinked. "Your what?" "An inspection," she repeated slowly, like I was a child. "Given your repeated violations, we need to assess your compliance with community standards." I almost laughed. "Karen, I'm not in the HOA. You have no right to inspect anything." The two board members shifted uncomfortably. They clearly weren't as confident as she was. "Actually," Karen continued, flipping through her papers, "our bylaws state that any property within a certain distance of the HOA may be subject to discretionary inspections if it affects the harmony of the neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. "So you just made that up?" "It's all in here," she said, shaking the clipboard. "Now, if you'll open the gate, we'll get this over with." I folded my arms. "No." Karen's smile cracked. "Excuse me." I said no, you're not coming onto my property. Her entitlement turned into rage in an instant. "This isn't up for debate," she snapped. You're legally required to comply. No, I'm not, I shot back. Now get off my property. She took a step forward, practically vibrating with fury. You don't get to refuse. This isn't just about you. This is about the entire neighborhood. Then stay on your side of the fence, I said. Problem solved. That's when it happened. Karen's eyes darkened, and before I could react, she lunged forward, shoving me in the chest with both hands. It wasn't a hard shove, more of a desperate attempt to push past me, but I stumbled back, completely caught off guard. One of the board members gasped. Karen, he's being unreasonable, she shrieked, trying to step past me. I immediately blocked her again. That's assault, Karen. Oh, don't be dramatic, she scoffed, flipping her hair like she hadn't just crossed the line. I barely touched you. And yet I have it on camera. Karen froze. Her eyes darted toward my security camera mounted on the garage. A red, blinking light, recording everything. Her entire face drained of color. You can't... I can, I said, pulling out my phone. And I will. The board members took a step back. We didn't know she was going to do that, one of them muttered. We should go. You're not going anywhere, I said, dialing 911. You just assaulted me and I'm pressing charges. Karen's face twisted into pure panic. Wait, we can work this out. I didn't mean to. Tell it to the cops. And just like that, her reign of terror was over. Karen's face went ghost white as I finished dialing. The moment she realized I was actually calling the cops, her entire attitude shifted. Gone was the smug, entitled HOA dictator. Now she looked genuinely panicked. Wait, hold on, she stammered, her voice suddenly sweeter, desperate. There's no need to get law enforcement involved. This was just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, I repeated, keeping the phone to my ear. You shoved me because I wouldn't let you trespass. What's there to misunderstand? One of the HOA board members, clearly horrified, took a step away from her. Karen, I think we should just go, he muttered. This isn't what we agreed to. But Karen wasn't listening. She was too busy trying to control the damage. Listen, she said, dropping her voice as if we were suddenly friends. I know things got a little heated, but there's really no need to blow this out of proportion. Before I could respond, the dispatcher picked up. I calmly explained that I had just been physically assaulted by my HOA president for refusing to let her onto my property. I also mentioned that I had security footage of the incident. That's when Karen lost it. You're really calling the police over nothing, she shrieked, her voice breaking. I didn't even bother answering her. The dispatcher told me an officer was on the way and hung up. Karen's panic skyrocketed. You're ruining my life over this, she snapped. Do you really think the cops are going to take your side? I smirked. I have video evidence. What do you have? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The silence was delicious. 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. A uniformed officer stepped out, adjusting his belt as he walked up. We got a report of an assault? He asked, looking between me and Karen. Karen immediately jumped in. Officer, this is a ridiculous misunderstanding. I was just trying to talk to my neighbor about community policies and he completely overreacted. The officer turned to me. Sir, do you have evidence of what happened? I nodded, pulling up the footage on my phone. Karen visibly flinched. The second the officer saw her shoving me, his face hardened. He turned back to her, his voice cool and professional. Ma'am, you're aware that what you did here is considered assault? Karen gasped dramatically. Assault? It was just a little push. He was being difficult. The officer sighed. I'm going to need you to calm down. We're going to have a discussion about what happens next. I stood back, watching Karen squirm. The other HOA members looked ready to bolt, but the officer called them over. Were you two witnesses to this incident? They exchanged nervous glances. One of them cleared his throat. Yeah. She, did push him. The officer nodded. Good. That lines up with the video. Karen spun on them. You're supposed to be on my side. One of the board members shrugged. We didn't agree to assaulting him, Karen. The officer turned back to me. Do you want to press charges? Karen's face drained completely. I crossed my arms, looking her dead in the eye. Yes, I do. She let out a choked gasp like she had just been sentenced to life in prison. No, you can't. This is ridiculous. It was just... The officer cut her off. Mom, put your hands behind your back. And just like that, Karen's reign of terror was over. Even though Karen had been arrested for assault, I knew she wouldn't go down quietly. The police had charged her, but she was already out on bail, and I had no doubt she was scrambling to save what little power she had left. Sure enough, a few days later, I got a formal notice from the HOA. They were calling for an emergency board meeting to discuss the incident between me and Karen. I almost laughed at the wording. Incident? She literally shoved me and got arrested. But I wasn't about to miss this. If Karen thought she could wiggle her way out of consequences, she had another thing coming. When I arrived at the community clubhouse, the place was packed. Word had spread fast, and even people who normally didn't attend HOA meetings showed up for the spectacle. I spotted Karen sitting at the front, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. Her face was still red from rage or embarrassment, or both. The second she saw me, she looked away. The HOA president, Linda, cleared her throat. All right, let's get started. This meeting has been called to discuss the recent altercation involving our HOA president, Karen. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people already looked uncomfortable. Others, mostly Karen's inner circle, sat stiffly, glaring at me like I was the villain. Linda turned to Karen. Would you like to explain what happened? Karen stood up quickly, smoothing her blouse. Thank you, Linda. Her voice was dripping with fake politeness. I just want to say that this entire situation has been blown out of proportion. I rolled my eyes. Here we go. I was simply trying to do my job, protecting the integrity of this neighborhood, when I was unfairly accused of something I didn't do. A few heads in the audience tilted in confusion. Karen, Linda interrupted, you were arrested. A ripple of chuckles spread through the crowd. Karen's eye twitched. Because he called the cops over a tiny misunderstanding. She whirled toward me, her voice rising. You know what really happened. I was trying to make sure your property wasn't becoming a nuisance. You were being uncooperative and difficult. I stood up. Karen, I have video evidence. The room fell dead silent. Karen's face dropped. I pulled out my phone and played the footage. Her shoving me, my reaction, her realizing she had been caught. The second it ended, a few people gasped. Some even started whispering. One of the board members, the same guy who had been with her that day, cleared his throat awkwardly. Yeah, I saw that happen too. Another board member, looking deeply unimpressed, turned to Karen. Karen, do you have any explanation for this? She was spiraling. This is ridiculous, she sputtered. This is just a smear campaign. I have done so much for this neighborhood. I have kept order, and you're all going to turn on me over one mistake? Linda sighed, rubbing her temples. Karen, you assaulted someone. That's not just a mistake. That's illegal. Karen glared at her. So what? You're going to punish me for trying to enforce community standards. No, Linda said. We're going to vote on your removal. Karen's eyes widened. What? You heard me, Linda said. All those in favor of removing Karen as HOA president, raise your hand. Almost every hand in the room shot up. Karen visibly paled. No, you can't do this, she stammered. I built this HOA. I am this HOA. Not anymore, Linda said simply. You're officially removed from your position. The room erupted into murmurs as Karen stood there, completely stunned. She had lost everything. With no title, no authority, and no power left to abuse, she was finally done, and honestly, it was glorious. Karen's downfall was swift and brutal. 1 minute she was the queen of the HOA. barking orders and controlling the neighborhood. The next, she was just another homeowner with a bruised ego and a criminal charge. The moment Linda announced her removal, Karen stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words. But for once in her life, she had nothing to say. Then, without another word, she grabbed her stack of useless HOA paperwork, stormed toward the door, and slammed it behind her. The whole room sat in stunned silence for a second before a few people started clapping. And then, one by one, the entire room erupted in applause. I wasn't the only one Karen had terrorized over the years. As the meeting wrapped up, multiple neighbors came up to me, some apologizing, others telling me how Karen had tried to bully them too. "You did us all a favor," one guy said, shaking my hand. "We've been trying to get rid of her for years." Another neighbor, an older woman, laughed. "Honestly, I thought she was going to burst into flames when she saw that video." I smirked. I wouldn't have been surprised. But the best part? The new HOA board, now under Linda's control, wanted to make things right. They sent me a formal apology for everything Karen had put me through and agreed to void every single bogus complaint she had filed against me. Even the neighbors who had turned on me started warming back up. One afternoon, the guy across the street who had been avoiding me finally came over. "Hey man," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for believing all that stuff Karen said about you. She made it sound like you were trying to ruin the neighborhood." I nodded. "I get it. She was good at manipulating people." He chuckled. "Well, either way, I'm glad she's gone." And to celebrate my victory, I did what any sane person would do. I threw a massive backyard barbecue. I invited all the good neighbors, the ones who had stuck by me or realized their mistake. People brought food, music played, and we all enjoyed our first Karen-free weekend in what felt like forever. And Karen? Oh, she was still around. But now, she was nothing. I caught sight of her watching from her window, glaring as people laughed and enjoyed themselves on my property. No more power, no more control. Just a bitter ex-HOA